Welcome and thank you for joining us today for Obstacles and Priorities on the Journey to the Software-Defined Data Center. My name is Raleigh Gould and I'll be your moderator for today's event. Our featured speakers are Enterprise Management Associates Research Director Torsten Volk and Enterprise Management Associates VP of Research Jim Frey. Torsten has over 10 years of conceptualizing and managing highly complex IT projects within the virtualization, cloud, and custom software application development realm. In his past positions, Torsten has helped organizations like the World Bank and Cricket Communications evaluate and identify the business value of emerging enterprise technologies. Jim has over 25 years of experience in the computing industry, developing, deploying, managing, and marketing software and hardware products, with the last 20 of those years spent in network management, straddling both enterprise and service provider sectors. And before I hand things over to today's featured speakers, I did want today's audience to know that Torsten and Jim will be wrapping up this presentation by answering your questions. So I do encourage you to log your questions at any time throughout the course of the presentation by using the Q&A functionality. Also, today's event is being recorded, and you will be receiving a follow-up email from Enterprise Management Associates tomorrow that will include the on-demand version. So be on the lookout for that. And now I'd like to go ahead and turn things over to our first featured speaker, Torsten Volk. Torsten?
Thanks, Raleigh, and welcome, everybody. Yeah, this is very, very exciting to kick off the year, so to say, even though it's not quite the beginning of the year anymore, with a major piece of research on the software-defined data center. And it is a topic that we've been talking about all of last year. And in a nutshell, it is about overcoming this traditional gap between expectations of the business on the one hand and what enterprise IT can deliver on the other hand. So each one of those charts that we are looking at today really shows a different angle at this very same topic and helps us answer the question of how we can successfully leverage this software-defined data center concept and give the business what they need to better compete in the marketplace without saying, no, you can't have this, you can't have that, and you can't have the other thing. So instead of an agenda, I wanted to jump right in today and want to show this chart. And this chart is so interesting and so exciting because it's not a question that we asked in this research. It is simply something that we received by correlating the background variables, so to say, doing some SPSS magic. And very surprisingly, we found that the longer you take to deliver IT services, application environments to the business, the less happy business stakeholders will be. And the quicker you do it, if you do it in less than 4 days, people are almost always happy, as you can see on this blue bar, when you look at this blue bar all the way to the left. Jim, I assume you were also pretty stunned when you saw this.
I was, yes. Thanks, Torsten, and my welcome as well to everyone joining us. This really was really exciting when we saw this kind of data point because it really, in my view, brings together and represents the essence of what SDDC is about. You'll see a lot of technical advantages, there's business advantages, but ultimately we're trying to get to a point where IT can be more responsive and deliver more quickly to their end user constituency base. And really clearly here you can see that there's a remarkable correlation between faster deployments and more happy end users. So a lot of what the rest of we're going to see and talk about today is, okay, good, this is what we're after, this is what we're really trying to achieve. How do we get there? There's a lot of new technologies involved, and what Torsten and I really spend a lot of time on and are geek out about all the time is how do we manage all this stuff? How do we make sure it's reliable and predictable, and it's gonna actually work once you deploy it all? And so with that, let's dive into the next stuff.
Yeah, and we definitely want to geek out today as well, but I want to start off by actual key pain points. Things in the data center in 2014 where organizations, where companies of any size basically told us, wow, if I could wave a magic wand and get rid of this thing, then my life would be so much better. And Jim, I'm sure you are happy about what you see at the top of the list.
Happy, I'm not sure I'd use the term happy to describe this. Sort of hanging and shaking my head, I guess, would be more appropriate. No, the fact that the high cost of networking came back as the key number one pain point voiced by the folks we talked to was, actually not unusual and not unexpected. And it does represent an opportunity for change. And so from that respect, yes, it is sort of exciting. When we get later on, we get to the point where we talk about some of the more specifics around networking, I'll bring this back up because I think it's really interesting in terms of how that ends up being at the top of everyone's list. Certainly, just to say a few extra words of color around this in general, we're looking at in the SDDC at networking being one of the technology elements. Certainly storage and server/compute are the other key technology elements. And then there's these multiple sort of ways you can get there. You can go by internal, external cloud, et cetera. And then it's all there in order to connect into and support the workloads and the applications. So it's definitely a multi-part puzzle. And something's got to be the most painful. Right now, it's still networking. And I look forward to talking more about what we found out about when we pull back the covers on that.
Yeah, and the next 2 points, they fall very well into my own wheelhouse, into the topics that I've been discussing, almost said, talking to death over 2013 and also in the first months of 2014. And this is all about this alignment of the internal IT infrastructure with business requirements. And this infrastructure is getting more and more heterogeneous. I have more and more options outside of the data center to pull in elements that can help me tremendously fulfill business requirements quicker and easier. And you can see key pain points from organizations in 2014 are that we please help them get rid of those issues, help them consolidate those technologies, and help them align them along the lines of business requirements. And storage is actually a shared number 3, the high cost of storage, and we'll have a couple of separate slides for storage simply because storage has always lagged behind networking and servers. And it's still not virtualized in the way that we know virtualization from specifically servers, but also networks. And we will talk about this as a tremendous pain point in a few minutes. So taking a step back and looking at how the software-defined data center can help here. And I have to start off by saying there is no consensus in terms of what it actually is. When we talk about software-defined data center, there is only really one thing that every practitioner out there understands, and that is it is a centralized management concept, not even necessarily a software, but it is the idea of centrally managing storage, network, servers, applications, all of those things that we have in the data center, and managing them along the line of IT service requirements so that business users get what business users need. And along those lines, you can see best practice and repeatable configuration. So basically, the pushing out and updating of business services is absolute key. You see that at number 2 here. 46% of respondents found that as part of the essence of the software-defined data center. And then obviously orchestration and automation, because you can have all the beautiful control panels that you want in the front end. What you need is a factory in the background that basically makes things happen, that goes across silos, pulls together what it needs, and automates it and lets me manage this through the central control panel. And then ultimately, we talk about analytics a lot. We see operational analytics pretty high up here. And the reason for that is simply this whole heterogeneous infrastructure that we are trying to manage in a consistent and policy-driven and compliant and secure manner comes with so many more variables and thresholds that we have to constantly look at, that we need something like a brain for the software-defined data center that goes way beyond static abstraction of infrastructure resources and monitoring those and tying those together, but that actually works in the background and alerts us if something is going wrong. And in the ideal case, obviously, even helps us select the ideal countermeasures. So if we take another step back, and that's really important, and I don't want to bore you guys very long with this, but it's really important to take a look at who we asked how we got this data. And there were 235 organizations that we included in the study. And this number is relatively low, but the reason for this is that we had extremely high requirements to include a company into the sample. And you can see all those elements here on this chart on the left. And we required basically companies to have at least 4 of those key technologies implemented in their data center. Otherwise, they would basically be eliminated from this research. And what this allowed us to do is basically get a picture of the future by looking at companies who've been there and who've done that and who've, experienced those pain points firsthand. And when we look at a little bit more how this sample is, how the sample is, how the different types of roles that constitute that sample, we see we have a significant business aspect, business users on the manager level and director level and above. We have IT executives, and we also have IT operations staff. And IT operations staff is the biggest part. Simply, those are the guys who know what they're talking about. Those are the guys who face those pain points on an everyday level. And interestingly enough, to the right, you see the company size. 46% of companies were 10,000 employees and more. And this should really say employees. It just says 10,000 and more, but this is basically the company size. And then we have mid-sized enterprises, 27%, and smaller enterprises, also 27%. And again, they were not selected based on size. It just happened that larger organizations had more of those cutting-edge software-defined data center technologies adopted than smaller ones. So when we asked companies about what is the most impactful technology in 2014, it's really interesting. We've talked about cloud for many years now, but cloud is still seen as the most impactful technology in 2014 and still dominating a lot of our research and a lot of the thought processes in the data center. And yeah, there's this general hunger of, using infrastructure as a service components, platform components, application as a service components, and piecing all of those things together into IT services. And the next aspect is that green slide of the pie that you should take a look at, and that is capacity management for physical, virtual, and cloud environments. And it makes me personally very, very happy that capacity management has taken second place when we asked about the one most impactful technology in 2014. And this shows that companies now finally see, after all this cloud dust has settled, that it's critical to have capacity management be part of everything you do from the beginning, from when you pick up your development tool to provisioning the environments and managing those environments. Capacity management is really ever present across this research, and I'll talk to this a little bit more in a minute. So what causes all of this complexity? And those are the business requirements. So we can see how extreme that impact is of business requirements on today's enterprise IT, on today's data center. And the best way of showing that is if you can look to the left, there's this little square, this little light green square at the left. And that square is the one that shows people who said that there is no increase in the number of requests coming from business units. It's only for the small companies, 500 to 2499 employees, a tiny percentage that basically said, nope, I don't know what you're talking about. There is really no difference. But all the others came up with all of those different types of impact of business requirements that are more frequently and more demanding. And, you see those gray bars there to the right of each one of those groups. And the gray bars show companies that still believe that traditional IT roles will stay unchanged. So that is, a little bit over 25%. I don't want to say surprisingly large number, but it's a substantial share of companies that still believe, IT roles will remain as they currently are. But the huge potential for change you can see when you look at some of the other columns here, the bright green one and the dark blue one, for example. They show the skill gap that organizations are coming across, and also the need for cross-domain orchestration, where we really need to assemble business services across traditional data center silos. And a lot of companies also are looking for more staff, more knowledge, more skills in general. They need a solution to better cope with those new business requirements. And the last interesting piece that I want to talk about is that purple bar that you see in the middle of each one of those groups, and that shows the big threat that the software-defined data center represents. That new paradigm basically represents to traditional enterprise IT operations roles. So to drill a little bit more into this business thought, I want to take a look at the business drivers of the software-defined data center. So why are we doing all this? Why are we even, on this webinar today? Why are we having this discussion? And the number one reason is a better business alignment of IT and more rapid application provisioning and better application mobility. So basically, quicker, more agile, at a lower cost provisioning IT services for business. So that is one part. But the other part, which is actually really interesting, is security. And you see that blue bar all the way to the left, where that stands for increased security. So it is a tremendous business driver for the software-defined data center to use that software-defined data center as a vehicle, so to say, to increase data center security. That is unexpected, at least for us in that study, because we were not specifically focusing on security, but security would resurface in probably more than a half dozen different charts. So that definitely tells us something about the tremendous security concerns that companies currently have when they are scrambling to meet business requirements. And
Torsten, if I can add, the interesting thing around security here, too, that I wanted to point out, the smallest organizations were the ones that are feeling, as you can see here, the most pressure there. And I think a lot of them are considering the opportunity of moving to a software-defined data center as a new opportunity to put in place better security versus what they've been doing in the past.
Yeah, and when we look at the key investment area here, and security also plays a role in there, but it's more of a meta criteria that spans all of those colorful bars on that slide. But we have capacity management as number one. And again, it's kind of reality settled in. And yes, we now have all those capabilities. We source our infrastructure from public and private cloud, and, we have all kinds of very flexible and very agile ways of provisioning application environments. And what we now need is capacity management to not longer be a static discipline. We need a new set of tools, a new set of processes, and a new culture for capacity management to make this basically part of everything that we do in the data center. And we had a webinar earlier, or actually late last year, on capacity management specifically, and we looked at some case studies, of big failures in IT last year, and pretty much all of those failures, SimCity 5 comes to mind, but pretty much all of the other failures were really due to this lack of capacity management in the DNA of application environments, beginning from when you start writing code all the way to deploying and testing your application in the end. And another important investment area is also multi-virtualization and cloud management and the centralized management of heterogeneous environments consisting of physical, virtual, and cloud resources. Practitioners, they ask for central systems to really monitor and manage those heterogeneous environments, because only if they have only a small number of interfaces to those environments can they really tweak them and make them so that business users get what they need and they get it as fast as they ask for it. And from an application perspective, configuration management was another huge topic, to be able to consistently deploy and constantly refresh applications. And integration with Puppet and Chef came up across this research as a requirement for basically pretty much any piece of hardware and software that we have in this software-defined data center. If one of the first questions always is, does this integrate with Puppet, does this integrate with Chef or with some of the other guys like SaltStack, so that I'm actually able to, as I said, quickly and consistently push out new features and give the business what they need. And Jim, I think you had a couple of thoughts from the network end on those investment areas too.
Yes, yeah. Just one thing to point out here, other than to also echo your comments about how consistently the focus here is on capacity and configuration, and that really is, I think, such a key aspect of getting SDDC done correctly and successfully. The thing I wanted to point out here was how far down the list the concept of network automation fell. Now, it's variable across the different size organization, a little bit more so on the smaller organizations, really not much emphasis at all in the mid-sized, and again, a little more in the upper end. But this is really sort of interesting because it's a complete opposite with the pain point we heard about earlier. And the pain point of the high cost of networking being, the most painful thing. Well, there's not necessarily the same emphasis being put on one of the best answers to solve that, which is network automation. And it may be also just concepts of what network automation represents. That could include some of the software-defined networking, which would be something that helps flexibility. It could also include just simply orchestration, even with non-software-defined networking. Any of those things should be helpful. So this is one of the areas, we'll talk about this on the takeaways later. I think that's an opportunity in the year going ahead, is to put a little more emphasis on that piece that's causing so much pain.
Yeah, and looking at the next slide, we want to look at how hard it is to move around applications, and obviously networking as well as storage. Gravity of storage is a big topic in that context. And servers, which is probably the smallest pain point when I think about moving around applications, simply because server virtualization is the most matured. But across the board, the software-defined data center is there for the application. It is there so that you can centrally control internal and external resources to host your application in the most secure, compliant, well-performing, and cost-efficient, and generally best value. And to be able to do that, the application needs to be portable. And there is still significant risk attached that we found when it comes to planning and executing the move of application environments. And that goes in line with this need to make the public cloud the natural extension of the software-defined data center, because it's almost misleading that we call it software-defined data center, because at the end of the day, this includes public cloud resources just as much as my own data centers that I have and own in my organization. I mean, there's enough companies that have only Amazon or only Microsoft Azure, only Rackspace, or for the biggest part, lots of startups have that, but they still require those concepts of the software-defined data center, because this is much more a management approach and an orchestration and automation approach as it is actually the description of a physical data center. I just wanted to make that clear. And this integration of public cloud and corporate data center is extremely important. You see that at the left, where 31% found the integration very important and 11% found it critical, and only 10% found the integration of, and by integration we obviously also mean the centralized management of public cloud resources within the context of my data center management tools, unimportant. So, and the reason why it's so important we find on the right-hand side, and security. And again, I warned everybody, security is going to resurface many times here. Security is still by far the number one pain point when it comes to tying together a heterogeneous environment along the lines of my business application that I'm trying to deliver. And then performance and cost are other issues, and compliance goes hand in hand with that. And all of those are, to a big degree, they result from a lack of experience, a lack of culture, a lack of process. So in general, we haven't been there, we haven't done that. So we are not entirely sure what's going to happen when we expand our data center and actually create applications that are relying on such a heterogeneous environment. And zooming really into the individual pain points, very interesting slide here from a network, server, and storage perspective. We again see that security is all the way at the top for network and for servers. And another thing, capacity management, capacity planning is at the top. It has the longest bar for storage. And obviously between the two, embedded, so to say, is management and governance. Because, again, we have networks, servers, storage, and we have them from different brands. We have them in different locations. We have them in the public cloud, the private cloud, physical, virtual, and we all need to provision them under a central governance framework. And this is hard, and it's one of the main issues that organizations are thinking about in 2014. So at the root of all of those challenges are traditional data center silos. Jim and I, throughout that webinar, we've kind of touched on issues that you have when you talk about the data center in a siloed manner, where we have separate application management groups, separate security, separate server groups, separate storage, separate network, all of those things. And at the end of the day, there has to be this process that deploys and refreshes and updates all the time those IT services and application environments. And the more we are still stuck in those existing silos, the more problems we have with that. And this research really nicely confirmed that, where this is really just the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot of more data when you read the actual research papers, but 34%, so a third of companies found breaking down silos as very important, and over half, or almost half actually, found this as important, and almost nobody thought, oh yeah, silos can stay and can remain the way they are in the data center as they've always been. Jim, I don't think this came as a surprise to you from a network angle.
Not at all, actually. And in fact, this is consistent with what we've seen from some of the other research that we've done around the fact that silos remain a challenge organizationally. This is really more oftentimes a political and people issue than it is a technology issue. So technology can help to, management technology in particular, can help to smooth the gaps between silos, but ultimately, really addressing them down to the point of how organizations are structured becomes an essential piece of this. I think it's just a great indication here, and one of the things I wanted to mention about this, we got this overwhelming majority of folks who participated in this particular survey. Remember, this is a little bit of the leading edge group. Sees this as a really, really important issue. And it does go beyond technology. It's something that has to be dealt with and it's an opportunity to deal with it as you enter into a software-defined data center strategy.
Yeah, and that's actually a very good point. A software-defined data center is as much a concept and a culture as it is dependent on technologies. And when we talk to your peers, we always find that everybody is very intrigued by doing things differently, by managing things through software, by getting rid of traditional interfaces that are all siloed, and every storage interface needs a different administrator. The NetApp guys and the EMC guys and the IBM guys, they are different even groups within the data center, and that is a significant problem. And that's why I already forwarded to software-defined storage, because this is one of the biggest revolutions. And, we don't use that term a lot, but it is really a game changer in the software-defined data center, because it helps across the board to deliver features and performance and quality of service and generally a management interface across storage that I bought 10 years ago, storage that I bought last month, and storage that I will buy next year, and tying those all together and having the business application, the IT service that is requested by the end user determine what kind of storage is necessary. And that doesn't mean, the end user telling me, okay, I need the following brand and type of storage, but the end user just tells me what they want to do with this application. And then I match my storage automatically based on policies. That is a tremendous advancement, and that is a tremendously important topic in 2014. So, Jim, I have talked about storage. I'll let you talk about networking challenges.
Great, thanks. So we also asked similarly, what do you see as the key challenge in that network corner? And here's some of that detail behind that pain point we talked about earlier. A couple of things to point out here. I think it's really kind of interesting that there really was no overwhelmingly common response here. There's lots of perceived issues around the networks, but a few of them that bubble to the top here and worth acknowledging. Certainly performance. Performance is always a concern. And we found, by the way, the folks that are in the smaller shops were the ones that were the most concerned about performance, much more so than the larger shops who really didn't see that as nearly as big of an issue. There's capacity planning. So this applies to the networking technology leg of the stool just as it does to the others. And here actually was the capacity issue, interestingly, amongst the folks that we talked to, was most called out by the line of business participants, the folks who were actually the consumers of IT. They were more concerned about this than were the actual IT folks. And then the troubleshooting and monitoring of these mixed physical and virtual networks. A lot of innovation going on in the management tool space to try to deal with this and to try to overcome these barriers of separate tools to deal with virtual versus physical environments. Worth keeping an eye on here too. And of course, not surprisingly, the people who feel that particular issue is high on their list are the ones who have to do it, the operations folks. So, Torsten?
Yeah, and the next slide is no webinar in systems management is complete, and no talk about the software-defined data center is complete without at least one slide and a few data points on OpenStack. And we picked those because they show two different things. The left slide shows how incredibly overwhelming the acceptance or the de facto the acceptance of OpenStack really is as a de facto standard. And when I say standard, a lot of people will scream because it's really not a standard at all. But what it is something that I cannot get around anymore in 2014 when I talk about software-defined data center and cloud. So whenever you hear somebody have projects in the data center, there's always a conversation tagged onto it. Oh, is OpenStack maybe something that can help me there? And in many cases, it is not. And there is very few production deployments out there, and we can see in OpenStack conferences very often the same large-sized vendors that do their case studies there. But at the same time, OpenStack is penetrating the data centers, and there is a lot of evaluation going on. There's a lot of thinking going on in OpenStack. And the reason why people are so intrigued about it is not just the buzz of analysts and vendors and everybody is spreading, but why practitioners are really so intrigued by OpenStack, you see it to the right, and that is scalability, cost, and feature range. So basically, what we want to have is the scale-out system where we can now have our developers just provision whatever they need in a policy-driven manner, and we don't really have to worry about the individual cost elements as much because it's commoditized. It's the infrastructure as a service layer. It abstracts server, network, storage, and a couple of other software features, such as very soon at least chargeback and showback and capacity planning and image management and a lot of other things that basically we do not want to spend money on because they're kind of a commodity. They're kind of all the same. And OpenStack lets us leverage all of those things and connect to all of those things. And it's a very intriguing value proposition and, very easy extension or a very easy thought to extend the software-defined data center very quickly through using OpenStack. And finally, we had to also have a slide on security only, simply because, again, security surfaced across this research in so many different spots. And the biggest concern was, you can see there, 20% of organizations, of practitioners and business guys and IT executives believed that the performance impact of security devices such as firewalls, intrusion protection, and a whole bunch of other hardware and software appliances is really difficult to gauge. And it's really hard to say what happens if I build a new environment and I use my traditional security processes and security technologies. There's really significant uncertainty in that regard, what is going to happen to the performance of my service, of my application. So that is one of the things that we find here. And the other one is that this donut that you see here, the slices are all relatively similar in size. And remember, we asked people for the one most important security consideration in that context of the software-defined data center. So each one could only select one. And the fact that this donut is so diverse really shows that there is no such thing as a central security solution, that you throw a blanket over everything and you secure your software-defined data center. Different deployments, different sizes of organization, different people in the data center, different practitioners with different backgrounds, all are worried about slightly different things. And I would expect this to consolidate this experience, and as we adopt and adapt to the software-defined data center a lot more in the future. And Jim, I think network, obviously, is also always a big consideration, simply because it connects everything to everything else. Do you want to say a few words about network and security?
Well, yeah, sure. Not just specific to network, but in general, that comment. What I wanted to add in here, and actually, I wanted to pick up on something you said. The way we asked this question, one of the reasons you get this sort of diversity of answers, similar. And I forgot to mention that was the case with the networking challenges too. We asked people to select, what they thought was the really key network challenges. And not everything that worried them, or you might see higher numbers. But basically, this performance impact, now a data point that we didn't put in front of everyone here today, that we did ask about was, what technologies are becoming less important in the future of the software-defined data center, and which ones are going to remain important. And the interesting thing is, what was called out as still the top answer of remaining important is dedicated hardware appliances. And most commonly, it is these kind of functions that you see here, the performance of these appliances for security functions, things like firewalls and IPS and DLP and other dedicated devices. While the current consideration, even in these more advanced sorts of folks that participated in this research, they're concerned about performance, and yet they're also not ready to let go of their dedicated appliances that they buy for these purposes. So it's really kind of an interesting contrast, and it's a little bit ironic. So it'll be interesting to watch how that changes going forward, because the real core essence of the SDDC is not to have dedicated hardware. It is to float on top of that and be more flexible about how you deploy. And in fact, when you move into the cloud, there is no dedicated hardware. So it's really quite an interesting contrast.
Yeah, and I think it also shows that we're just scratching the surface right now. It's really a journey, and we call almost everything a journey in research projects, but it's never been so true for the software-defined data center. It's not something that you implement, and it always gets me very upset when I see white papers and when I see customer conversations about, we are implementing the software-defined data center in the next couple of quarters. It is something that you plan. It is a philosophy. It is something, that you evaluate and judge everything new that you introduce into your data center by a new network appliance, a new converged infrastructure solution, a new plate server solution, a new security tool, a new performance management tool. Whenever we look at those tools now, we look at it kind of through the eyes, or actually through the eyes of the software-defined data center and how it can help us manage all of our infrastructure, internal and external, and whether those are cloud servers that are hosted on Amazon, we don't even know what hardware they're on, or whether they are my expensive converged infrastructure refrigerators in the data center. We judge everything through that lens, and the quicker we really adopt that thought process, and the quicker we adopt our way of organizing the data center, the way of adjusting our processes, and the way of judging and evaluating new tools, new software, new hardware, the quicker we'll get to this end state of actually software defining the way the data center needs to look like, and software basically encapsulating what it needs to run optimally and, compliant and secure and performing well, and, also cost effective and cost efficient. So those are really my final words. And Jim, I'll let you say a few final words of your own.
Yeah, thanks. Just a couple of additional thoughts. Definitely agree with, support everything you said there. A couple of additional thoughts, which is just that we really saw some pretty strong themes throughout our research here. We hit them, but just to sort of remind everyone, a lot of focus on capacity management as being an area of investment. A lot of concern with security, but looked at it both as a concern and an opportunity to do a better job around security within the SDDC. Networking is still sort of the boat anchor dragging behind this ship, if you will. But frankly, this is where I spend a little time toward the end there. There's a great opportunity for organizations to go ahead and really try to come to grips with that, pull that anchor in, figure out how we're going to do a better job of incorporating the networks and the storage. We saw this as well in integrated orchestration automation because they need to come along for the ride too. The boat can't actually arrive at dock without the anchors as well. So I think that's some of the conclusions I saw out of this, is that it's really moving quickly. It's very exciting, and there's of course some opportunities to do better in some areas. Raleigh, I think we're ready to flip to Q&A at this point.
Great. Before we jump into the questions, I did want today's audience to know that the Software-Defined Data Center Research Report is available on the Enterprise Management Associates website, as well as the summary. I'll also send links in that follow-up email that will go out tomorrow. If you do have questions, you can log them in the Q&A panel. You should see that in the right-hand column of your screen. Torsten, let's start with you. The first question is, what do you see as the one key component of the SDDC?
The one key component, I would almost call it a philosophy change. It's a different way of, it's basically seeing that we do not want to continue the way we have worked in the past. Not that it was bad, but we want to basically look at what we've been doing from a slightly different angle, so that we radically align everything we do, all of those traditional silos, based on application and IT service and business service requirements, and basically question a little bit, when we evaluate features of a new product, question a little bit if we evaluate them from that angle of a software-defined data center. Jim, do you have thoughts on this?
No, I think you hit it pretty well.
Great. This next question I'll address to you, Jim, and then Torsten, if you have any feedback, feel free to provide it. Jim, how do you see the SDDC relative to the software-defined networks?
Oh, yeah, sure. Sure, thanks. So the software-defined network there's a couple different forms of software-defined networks out there. There's the open flow based splitting of delivery from control plane. That's actually still involves a lot of physical networking. It's just a different way to control and manage the physical networking. The controller layer can be pure software. What it does potentially lend itself to is more automation and orchestration. And then there's the virtual network overlays that are really entirely software based and are an evolutionary step forward from what has always been the virtual networking components within hypervisors in the server virtualization world. And those seem to be picking up steam too. We did ask as part of this research how many of the folks had actually were looking at or leveraging these kind of technologies. And actually we saw within, again, this sort of specialized early adopter group, we saw pretty high levels of interest and activity, in the 40+% range on average in these kinds of software-defined networking technologies. Actually, interestingly, within the mid-tier, it was even over 50%. So there's certainly, that's an important piece. You don't have to do SDN, though, in order to accomplish SDDC, because there's so much more to SDDC. SDN, I think, long run does have to be a part of the story, or at least there has to be some way for bringing the networking piece in line in terms of orchestration and automation. Torsten, anything else that you picked up on that?
No, I think you summed it up just right. I was actually already going to the next question here about number one recommendations with respect to addressing IT silos, and it's actually I like that you asked for the number one recommendation because that makes me think a lot harder instead of just throwing out a list. And I think it's visibility, the number one recommendation. I think it's the core problem has always been, the storage guys or the network guys or even the server guys. They just have their SLAs attached to uptime of their little piece of infrastructure, and they have no idea what it did to an application when they migrated storage volumes, or when they did maintenance, or when something went down in its storage. There's no direct connection to all of the different ripple through effects that you get in the business. And I think providing this kind of visibility from the application all the way down to the disk in the case of storage, or to the network switch and router in the case of network. I think that is probably my number one recommendation. Get in technologies that let you do that. When you buy a new SAN, when you think about buying software-defined storage or new network equipment, think about how you can establish gradually, because obviously you can't do that once. You can't just rip and replace everything you have. But how can you gradually make that storage guy aware, hey, man, if I do X, Y, Z thing on Friday, then here's what I'm going to affect. Here's a short list of things I'm going to affect, and make that automatic, make that mapped through from all the way to the bottom to all the way to the top. I believe that would be my number one recommendation.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it sort of ties back also to the, what we saw early on as some of the key values perceived in SDDC, which is, and some of the key enablers, which was centralized management. That really starts, there's two sides to management, visibility and control. And if you are able to centralize and bring in data, across all of those traditional silos, the visibility gives you the control you need. That way you know what it is you need to go address at any point in time. So I would agree with Torsten. I think cross-domain visibility is probably the number one objective, and making sure along the way, I'll use another hypey buzz term, which is collaboration. You find a way that you're able to share that information openly and readily. And that, by the way, is no small feat in a lot of organizations. A lot of organizations historically have been timid or cautious about sharing data because they don't want to let their dirty laundry be seen. I think is mostly really truly the case. But they don't want to open themselves up to criticism if their backyard isn't completely clean.
Thank you, Jim and Torsten. Staying in the vein of the SDN, Frank wants to know what kind of change is required from an operational model perspective when supporting SDN, SDDC, rather than the traditional hardware-based network support.
Well, so that's not entirely SDN related, but it's a little bit broader than that. I think we've touched on it in a few ways here, and we just kind of talked about it, which is the silos issue. I think one of the things you have to do, especially as you move to SDDC, is you need to come to grips with any siloing that you have and try to get beyond that. The themes that we saw here about centralized management being so important in this, I think that's your answer right there. You've got to centralize the management visibility, which means integrating or centralizing your management tools, but also then your management practices in your lines of communication, your workflows, your task flows. They need to be aligned instead of everyone do your part and it'll all come out okay in the end. That doesn't work anymore. Now we need to all work together. And I think that's really the sort of revolutionary aspect of the operational model impact of SDDC.
It really is, and all those interfaces, the time when we had to make the phone call, and first the data center guys told us why we cannot have what we actually need, but here's what we can really have, and then the haggling starts in terms of what's realistic and what we want to afford and what takes a reasonable amount of time, and so all of a sudden that great business idea gets so aggravating to me as a business project manager or as a business director. And at a certain point, I think, man, let's just do something on Amazon and pay a guy at Rent-A-Coda to do this for me real quickly. I don't even want to get reimbursed for the Amazon because it costs only a few dollars. That is, I think, that key piece where the individual fiefdoms within the data center really get broken down, and the challenge is to do that in a way that's not threatening, and we see that as an issue. That chart that I showed before, where people, IT operations guys, actually really feel threatened because all of a sudden their dirty laundry is there for everybody to see, and that can be scary. So it's a true paradigm shift. Raleigh.
Thanks, Torsten. Let's end with you with one final question. Besides Cloud IaaS, what would be the main application use case for SDDC?
Cloud infrastructure as a service is really not a use case. It's really just a deployment target for what I can do with the software-defined data center. So, I can have OpenStack as one of many deployment targets. I have Amazon AWS as another one. I have a couple of PaaS platforms, Cloud Foundry sitting on top of OpenStack, Red Hat OpenShift, or there's so many platforms that provide me those individual services, and the key is to change my thinking and to see infrastructure as a service just as a means to an ultimate end, and as a way of provisioning the little components that I need, and then the real thinking is the piecing together of all of those elements, hardware and software, and turn those into a business service. And then at the end of the day, if I do everything optimally in my software-defined data center, those things are then reusable. So my business mashes, my stakeholders in a little internal app store ultimately can mash together different things. I have a component for credit card processing. So we see this all the time, saying, we can't do this project because we can't take credit card easily. So we have to pay somebody to develop it, and all the pain and best practices and regulatory requirements. And no, at the end of the day, once somebody has done it, has written it, it shouldn't matter if that's based on OpenStack or based on vCloud, or based on Citrix cloud platform, or based on anything in the data center. It should just be portable and reusable, and we should be able to call it from software. And that's why another reason why we call this a software-defined data center. Software is defining what the data center needs to do, through APIs.
Great. Thank you, Torsten, and thank you, Jim. And I wanted to thank our audience as well as taking time out of your schedule to join us today. I will be sending out a follow-up email from Enterprise Management Associates tomorrow. So if you want to listen to this again or forward on, look for that email. Thanks again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.